Welcome back to the channel. Please remember to like and subscribe and get the books on Amazon. That would be very much appreciated. So once again we will be discussing some of the topics from ancient civilizations and the ancient apocalypse. So today we'll be examining the wonderful and weird civilizations that existed some 35,000 years ago, all the way up to 12,000 years ago, before the end of the last ice age. So they would have lived during the ice age, they would have strived and would have endeavored during the ice age. This time period on the planet would have been the time period that gave rise to many myths, many legends, many gods, many Greek gods, many Hindu gods. Many of these fairy tales and stories, things such as dwarves that happen to be skilled, wise, good with metals, good with stones, concepts such as those would have gotten their origin from these moments. So let's begin by first giving the backstory or the main goal of this video. So as we were saying, some persons believe that the Ancient Apocalypse Netflix series didn't bring a lot of new information. It just reassured some existing information that persons from the community would have already known of. But I guess this series was more geared towards attracting newer persons who have never delved into these areas before. So accepting that Graham Hancock is on the right track, we can then branch into some other areas. So in that same vein, another significant person in the community is Jimmy of Bright Insight. So his major videos surround Atlantis and the location of Atlantis, and both he and I we ascribe to the principle that the record structure is the most likely location of Atlantis. However, unlike him, what I plan to do is to not just say where Atlantis is, but to actually dive into who they were, what was their backstory, who were their ancestors. Is the record location their original home? Did they migrate to that location? How did they come to be the colonizers of Egypt? Because in Plato's dialogue, the Egyptian priests actually stated that they were a part of the Atlantis colony. The Egyptians have a king list that goes back some 35,000 years. And the priests also made mention of several world level catastrophic events. Some were fire, some were water, some killed persons on the coast, some killed persons in mountains, where they accounted for at least 9 times where the entire global civilization or humanity had to restart from scratch, relearn language, relearn society and sophistication. That's how Plato's dialogue expressed the deluges that impacted the planet. So if 12,000 years ago was one such event, it resetted humanity from scratch. And Randall Carlson, another significant person in the community, he states that most likely the Younger Dryas period or the Younger Dryas event was one of these events as well. And he states that it's either a comet impact or it's something to do with the sun, such as a coronal mass ejection. But where I differ with him on in terms of what a coronal mass ejection is, I look at a coronal mass ejection not as a high energy beam of light or just solar winds. I look at it as more than just solar wind and high energy particles, because I see the sun as more than just a ball of hydrogen. So a coronal mass ejection would in fact send debris from the sun, like large scale chunks of debris that include heavy elements, that include metallic elements, that include planet-sized gusts of debris showering across the entire planet, showering across the entire equatorial plane of the sun, which is the location of all 9 planets or all 8 planets. So all stellar objects within the solar system would be impacted by such an event. So I see the sun periodically going through cycles that produces these levels of things that can affect the entire solar system. So I'm not just seeing it as the Younger Dryas as a possible just only a comet related event. It might actually be a event that was caused by the sun itself. So taking that into account now, we can understand that perhaps so the first major event that we have records of, and this one is also stated to be a comet impact, was the friendly dinosaurs, the Spinosaurus and the Triceratops. So millions of years before we as humans or our relatives were ready to walk upright, the dominant entities, the dominant living beings on the planet would have been these majestic giants. They roamed and conquered. They were global, they were on every continent. And something significant from space wiped them out completely, covered the entire globe. So that's perhaps one of the events that predate our human records of what took place. But then where we can move to next is out of Africa. So everyone accepts, based on mitochondrial data, that humanity are the first upright walking hominids found their space in Africa, and specifically the region where Tanzania, Ethiopia, eastern section of Africa, the Horn of Africa, that's where the most significant fossils of hominids that relates to humans have been found, and also in Morocco, which is in North Africa. So that's the significant locations that the most ancient remains of close human relatives have been found, and human as in Homo sapien in this case. So Homo erectus was like that relative of ours, and it was some 200,000 years ago, 250,000 years ago, and the migration out of Africa happened via the region where Egypt in North Africa meets the Middle East. In this case, I guess we can refer to it as Mesopotamia, those type of concepts, Persia, that region of the world. So this is a significant milestone, or this is a significant thing that relates to Atlantis and to our civilization. So many persons assume that the significant works or the significant megalithic structures, the pyramids, the Easter Island Moai statues, all of these structures, some persons believe that they might be created by aliens, or they might be created by gods that once walked the earth. But perhaps it's a story that is actually hidden in plain sight, hidden in our DNA, but it's hard to grasp or accept that potentially there are times where the entire planet can lose recollection of what it used to be, or so many persons dying off, or so many living beings dying off in one single event, that a majority of the world forgets what it actually was. So in this scenario, I think the persons who we refer to as Atlanteans were human, but it was the cultures or the societies or the races in the Ice Age time of the planet was slightly different in this sense. So when Homo erectus and Homo sapiens left Africa, we also encounter are split out into these groups or relatives. So you have humans, which for roughly 200,000 years have been relatively the same skull size, same shape, same brain structure, same upright walking, same use of tools. So for several 100,000 years we would have been that. And we have lesser known cousins that are Neanderthal and Denisovans, which are much closer to each other. So they have larger brains, larger skull sizes, and they are depicted in modern media as more violent instead of being as intelligent or more intelligent. So we don't look at them as significantly intelligent. We look at them as vicious cavemen that were more warlike and more violent. And perhaps this is the misconception that led us down an incorrect path. So if we instead view the Ice Age period, because 200,000 years ago when we left Africa and ventured into Europe, a majority of the planet would have been frozen. So firstly, there would have been no major seafaring race that was able to voyage around the planet, and even if they could, 200,000 years ago, the entire northern section of the planet would have been frozen. The entire southern section would have been significantly frozen. Lots of icebergs would have been like icebergs the size of entire countries would have been floating in both the northern seas and the southern oceans. So additionally, Siberia or Russia would have been almost entirely frozen. All of Canada down to America would have been significantly frozen. So when the migration happened, majority of the groups would have been located in the Eurasian region of the planet. So if you look at the globe, they would have ventured out of Africa and would have been in this region. And here's a look at it. So as you can see, the blue-green region is more Neanderthal territory. This red region is where we discovered Denisovans, and Homo sapiens would have exited from Africa here. So all of up here would have been cold. So in the most extreme cases, so imagine in these times we would have been cave dwellers mostly. So living in caves would have allowed the species to survive the harshness of the winter. It wouldn't be feasible to build houses made of wood and sticks and mud and grass. They would freeze to death. So they would either stick to the temperate climate zones or the tropical zones, or they would have been like Eskimo type people who could have worn fur coats from whatever animal they slaughter, and they could venture through the cold and find ways to survive, making their way through to northern Siberia, making their way across the land bridge into America. So all of those processes could have still taken place, but a majority of the groupings would have been isolated to the Euro-Asian region. Why this is significant is that although in modern time there is no Neanderthal subsect of people that have significant Neanderthal DNA in their system or in their groups, there is still almost all Europeans and even some Africans and Asians have up to 2% Neanderthal DNA in their, whenever you check their genome sequence. So what this means is that at some point one of their family members or relatives or ancestors was a Neanderthal. So this also means that it was either commonplace to have Neanderthal and Homo sapiens intermingle, or it was frowned upon, in which case you would have had groups that would have been isolated from others that had very high genetic markers that relates to Neanderthal, and a similar thing would have happened for Denisovans as well, where you might have significant population density areas that is more concentrated with a mix of Neanderthal and Denisovans, and a very tiny percentage of Homo sapiens. So in regards to this now, perhaps the persons who we refer to as Atlanteans or Atlantis were these persons. They were persons that had significantly higher levels of Neanderthal DNA and Denisovans DNA. So instead of only having 2% of their DNA being related to or being tied to Neanderthal and Denisovans, they might have had as high as 75% of their DNA being from the Neanderthal side of their family, and they embrace those traits and would have been more attracted to persons who shared the features of their Neanderthal side of their descendants, or the Denisovan sides of their descendants. So in this scenario, this would mean that the persons who later were known as Atlanteans, or being from Atlantis, would have originated in this region of the planet. So the region between the Caucasus Mountain, the Black Sea, and the whole Mesopotamia region of the planet. So that's a significant stance to take, and I will now give you some reasons why it's more likely that this is the region that they're from. So let's get into some of that now. Okay, so this is what we would call a map or a projection. It shows all the continents, all the countries spread out in a standard way that you can understand. All these markers are markers of locations around the globe that have specific tool marks, quarrying technique, building styles that relate to the concept that we would call megalithic or Asian advanced technology. So things that are explained by archaeologists as to being stones being pounded together or chisels being used, but the look of the stones or the hardness of the stones suggests that that was not the way it was made. So as you can see, there's a high concentration of these structures within Upper Egypt, in Mesopotamia, in Ethiopia, in India, in Indonesia, Cambodia, even in China and Japan. Then there's Easter Island, and then there's a high concentration in South America, which is in Bolivia and Peru. Also, when we look at the globe as a whole, this same map, it looks like this. If we have the record structure here, which eventually became the capital of Atlantis, if you venture through the opening of the Mediterranean, which Plato called the Mount of Hercule, so this is where the Atlanteans would have entered into the Mediterranean, and they would have fought the Athenians here. They would have colonized Egypt here. Petra and other significant sites would have been here. Up here is Turkey, and in these times, as we were saying earlier, a significant part of the world would have been frozen, given that it is the middle of an ice age. So we're thinking the time frame is, let's say, 200,000 years ago it was still an ice age, 35,000 years ago it was still an ice age, and up to 12,000 years ago it was still an ice age. So for the Atlanteans to go this way around Africa would have been a monumental task, because as soon as they reached down this section, there would already be a lot of icebergs, ice features, and that would sink your vessel. So it would be a dangerous route. So most likely, if they traversed the globe, when they eventually took to the sea, or if they eventually took to the sea, the easiest routes would have been the Mediterranean and across the Atlantic, because this would have been tropical zone, so it would have been, at certain times of the year, it would be navigable. However, there would not be a Panama Canal, so crossing this section into the Pacific would not be a possibility by ship. So this route would have been one of the more preferred routes into the Red Sea, across the Gulf of Aden, into India, into Malaysia, and into China and Japan, and then into Easter Island and over to South America. Another feature of this map is what we would call, based on slight pole shifts that have happened with the planet, these markers highlight the original, not the original, but the poles that the planet would have had 12,000 years ago. And what is significant about these marks is that it showed where the equator line would have been, and the equator line passes through or very close to several significant features, one of which happens to be Easter Island, the high concentration of megalithic sites in Peru and Bolivia. It passes at Brazil as well. It passes right next to the record structure. It passes through Egypt. It meets in Mesopotamia with the other significant line that marks the pole. Passes near I believe this is Angkor Wat in Cambodia, so it passes near that place as well. And we're back to this side on Easter Island. So what this suggests is that eventually they became sophisticated enough to traverse the globe. They knew what the equator was, and they understood that sticking close to the equator, building close to the equator, would have been zones that would year round be relatively cool, relatively warm, and survivable during the ice age. So now where did they come from? So that was a story about how they traversed the globe, but now we're getting back to where they came from and who were their ancestors. Okay, so a significant feature of the tool marks or the workings of the ancient works that we can attribute to them is works that look like this, like stones were being carved, or stones that are significantly hard like granite that should not be easy to work seem to have been easy to work. So they must have had a tradition that encouraged working stone or relied on working stone. So that's one significant question. What this also means is this, right? So in the Germanic folklores of Europe, which also ties into the several other northern European countries' folklore, there is a legend of persons who they call dwarves. So dwarves dwarf legend so the dwarf myth or legend, as you can see here, it's a Germanic folklore, but it also ties into several other regions, but it's all from northern Europe, and it mentions dwell in mountain and in the earth. So they dwelled in mountains, in caves, or underground, and they were good with they had wisdom, good with smelting, mining, and crafting. So all of that suggests that there were a mythical or a mysterious group of persons who understood how to work stone in very precise ways. Additionally, if we look at this and we look at this, it looks like similar works but on different scales. So the stone cutting process kind of makes the rock look rounded, not really straight edge. It just so regardless of the hardness of this is granite, is very hard. This is more like volcanic tuff or limestone, so this is much softer. But what this indicates is that there was, and even if we can look at some other sites as well. So this is This is Petra, Jordan. As you see, it's very similar, rounded. They're working natural stone bedrock, and it seemed easy. It seemed not cumbersome. You don't see a lot of chisel marks, you don't see a lot of wear on the stone. It just looks curved and simple. Now this is where the major story starts. So Turkey is one location in the world that has over 600 cave cities, not just buildings, not just caves, entire cities that exist underground, entire cities that exist in mountain sides with dozens of rooms, hundreds of rooms, locations for toilets, locations for bath, location for keeping animals. It's like they built a bunker city 600 times over. So those types of building techniques would have either been to protect them from the harsh winters during the Ice Age or to protect them from massive animals, large saber-toothed tigers, large mammoths, stuff like that. So Turkey is a significant location. So if we go back to our map, Turkey is up here. So what we could say in this scenario is that this region of the world is the region where you had Neanderthals here, humans dominating here, Denisovans dominating here, and in this region here is where they met, intermingled, and there was a significant breakthrough or hybrid. And those persons figured out how to work stones because they would have, this is the structure of their history. They would have been cave dwellers, so they would have lived in caves. Their ancestors would have lived in caves. Their heritage would have been based around caves. When they started becoming advanced, they would have found ways to enlarge those natural caves, found ways to add extensions to their caves, found ways to evacuate the cave in case of emergency, found ways to connect one cave to another cave. So these are the types of scenarios that would have initially allowed them to figure out how to work stone, understand stones. And this is what would have happened. They would have been here in kind of the north, and they would have eventually moved down south, and they would have ended up into Turkey. So Turkey is significant because this is Göbekli Tepe, and Göbekli Tepe is a known site that has significantly worked stones with animal and humanoid figures on those stones, well worked, well manicured stones. That location was intentionally buried under stone, not just rubble, but neatly packed under stone. So it was like they were moving on from that location. It's like they retired that location and moved on. So Turkey in this scenario, and additionally Göbekli Tepe is known to be more than 12,000 years old. because he was buried, at least at that point in time, or forgotten at that point in time. So Turkey has two significant features. So it has a lot of cave systems, or cave cities, or elaborate cave structures with rooms and levels and dimensions and sections, and many of them are interconnected, and it has Göbekli Tepe. So this implies that their original home was, when they became advanced, or not just lived in natural caves, but they could make their own caves, make their own stone structures, they would have been in Turkey. Eventually they would have moved further south, and I'm not sure how this ties to the concept of the Anunnaki and those type of those are more alien driven stories, but these persons would have been seen to the normal non-hybrid humans that are mostly genetically related to Homo sapiens, would have seen these persons as significantly more intelligent, significantly more advanced. They would be working stones, they would have been husbandering animals, because when they were in the north, they would have kept their animals indoor in the caves during the winter, so they would have understood how to take care of animals, how the seasons work. So when they moved down more into the Tigris River Valley region, they would have brought with them more ideas than the normal persons living there would have had. So they would have known significant stuff about the cycles of the moon, cycles of the sun, structure of the earth, how to interact with animals, how chemistry work, how to work stone, and so on and so forth. So they would have moved into this region, and then they would have moved on to Petra, Jordan, and this region here is where Petra, Jordan is. So we can look at Petra, Jordan. So in this case, they would have been coming from these types of caves. So I don't know how many centuries or thousands of years they would have been building structures like these, but eventually they would have been able to build structures that look like these. As you see now, it's more refined, perfect cuts in the stone, more elaborate features. As you can see, you can clearly see that this part is natural rock that has not been processed or dressed, and this is more refined and dressed. And in these moments, I'm not sure how significantly more wet or more rainy these areas would have been. In our time now, these locations are deserts, but in those times this would have been the fertile crescent of the world, the birth of civilization, the place where farming starts. Concepts like those would be prevalent. So in this scenario, this is additional, this area is significant because you see it's the location where all the significant lines of the planet would have met. So the equator would have been here, and this other significant line would have run near this region. So in my estimation, 200,000 years ago, this happened, this migration happened from Africa. Within that 200,000 time frame, or within 100,000 years, the groups of hominids intermingling, finding ways to survive the cold, finding ways to make use of minimal resources, food resources, to escape from animals, to hunt, to feed, to raise animals, to plant new plants, and all of that would have given rise to this major group that I'm not sure how large their population would have been, but they would have had significantly different features from most humans, because they would have more resembled or kept a lot of the traits from their Neanderthal side. So they may have had bigger brains, they may have had different skull structures, bone structures, and so on and so forth. They would definitely have had different customs. They would have more lived in cave type structures. They would have worked stone, while normal humans would have more built huts or built things out of trees. Yeah, they would have used fire and stuff, but and stone tools as well. But those stone tools would have been more jagged edged and attached to wood, rather than the advanced stuff that this group would have been capable of. So once they made it here, this is also where another interesting thing would have taken place, which is they would have been mountain dwellers here, they would have been mountain and cave dwellers here, they would have been farmers here, but they would have also grown to become fishermen, because from the river here, they would have, the river valley here, the Tigris River region, they would have also understood how to capture fish and so on and so forth. When they came to the Mediterranean coast section of, this is Lebanon and Jordan here, this is another significant thing, which is that they would have now, whether on their own or learning from the locals, adopted a seafaring life, or sea venturing life. What this implies as well is that this is most likely the moment when they ventured into the Nile and would have first encountered Egypt. So in this moment, there would have been no pyramids in Egypt as yet. They would have been the ones with their significant stoneworking skills who constructed the pyramids. So if we look at the Egyptian kings list, which extends back to 35,000 years, we could estimate that their ventures here would have been 35,000 years ago, so which is significantly further than the 12,000 years ago that most sites around the world are being aged at. So they possibly moved into Egypt or sailed into Egypt for the first time some 35,000 years ago. So if we look at so they would have moved into Egypt, and they would have seen Egypt as a new region to conquer, because as I was saying, they would have been used to the Tigris region, and in these moments Egypt would have been not a significant desert type region. It would have been more tropical, more rainforest, more rainfall. Same thing with the Tigris region. It would have been more like a tropical zone, close to almost a rainforest or a savanna type region. So they would have seen it as a new area to conquer, new territory to take over, new area to spread into. So perhaps their headquarters in these moments would have been Petra. And although I'm showing you the treasury in Petra, Petra is several miles long. It has, as most person would say, every location around the world, they try to label them as tombs or castles or palaces. So this is some of the other areas of Petra, Jordan. So archaeologists label all of these as tombs, but they may have been city homes, dwellings for an entire civilization that lived here. So all of this type of mountainside cave systems and houses extend for miles upon miles along mountain ravines and canals that run for many miles. You have entire locations that resemble theater halls, entertainment centers, shopping areas, markets. So all of that was in Petra. So they would have moved into Egypt, and they would have been the ones who did this. So this is an unfinished obelisk. They would have been the ones who did this. They worked the granite to build structures, which they call temples, but they would have been structures. So that would have been their first significant move. So their journey would have been here as cavemen, here as mythological beings that are said to be able to work stone, but they are hidden, shrouded in mystery. When they came into Turkey, they would have been more known, more spread out, building more structures. When they came into Jordan, Petra Jordan, they would have been more refined. When they came to the sea here at the Mediterranean, they would more have conquest on their mind, more venturing into the sea. So this is now where we reach close to the story of what Plato had. So what would have happened here is they would have been seafaring people. So by the time the birth of Poseidon, who was the king or the creator of Atlantis in the main story from Plato and Solon and the Egyptians, Poseidon had a weapon which we call a trident. But in these times, that trident would have also been a fishing. So this is the trident, but it's not just a weapon. It has practical uses, which is if you're a seafaring captain in those moments, it would be like a harpoon. So you can use it to catch fish, or you can use it to spear fish. So you could have a spear gun type thing on your vessel. You fire it at a large fish, but you can also hunt on the beach or in the rivers with it. You just throw it at the fish and you spear them and you take them out. So as you see, this mythological being or this entity with similar features and similar qualities is shared amongst the Greek and Roman cultures and even the Indian cultures. So when we venture into the worlds of mythological beings, what we're seeing here is that the German rumors or the German stories or folklore of beings that may have been dwarves that were skilled with stone masonry and stuff, and who came from a mountaintop, which is kind of the story of the Greeks, which is that Mount Olympus was the location or the origin of these persons. You can see here that some of it is being tied together. That's not the only comparison from mythological beings. Let me find another one. So as you see here, this is also a comparison of some Greco-Roman gods that have similar features to an Indian deity. So, and here is another one. So this is Athena, which is the Greek goddess, and the Indian god as well. So many stories that are being tied together. So the dwarfs were probably those same persons, but from an older time. Generations later, they became more sophisticated and were less hidden, less isolated by themselves, and more intermingling with other groups, but not necessarily having intercourse with them, because they would have probably stayed within their own grouping, or marry within their own grouping, because one of the possibilities is that their genes may have been recessive genes, and this is the reason, right? So human Homo sapiens are from the original branch, which is the Homo erectus branch. So human Homo sapien genes might not be recessive as Neanderthal and Denisovans, which are newer genes. So their large skull structure, if they bred with a normal human, you might only have 1 or 2% of those offsprings maintaining the large skull structure, while 98% might adopt the human skull structure. So what that means is that within a few generations, most of their features would have been gone. So if they had bushy eyebrows, or their nose were a certain way, or their skin color was a certain way, or their eye color was a certain way, or their teeth structure was a certain way, brain development was a certain way, many of those features would have been lost if they didn't marry within their group. If they married outside, it would only result in a significant set of traits being lost. So although they were here and spreading out and conquering, they might have stick to their self in terms of marriage and those type of constructs. So back to the story here. So now we would have the birth of Poseidon. He wields a trident. And a funny story as well is that the Trapine is one of the types of ships that originated in this region of the world. So it's more popular for the Romans and Greeks for using those ships, but the ship actually got its name from this region, so from what is now known as Lebanon. So it would have been that type of ship that they probably had. So the Trapine it has 3 rows, so that's why it has that name, and similar to the trident, what has the 3 prongs on it. So that's another indication that it's most likely this region that Poseidon's ancestors originated. So we have Petra, which is a significant location here. The Trilaton, okay, that's another thing. The Trilaton megalithic sites with the Temple of Jupiter is in this region. So they would have first conquered Egypt or made this river system their home, which would have been a fertile region. So for several thousand years, this region would have been where they would have made their a significant part of their empire. They would have then spread out to several other locations within northern Africa, and this is now how they would have gotten to the record structure. So within before the last ice age, this region of the world would have been tropical, would have had lakes. The Nile River would have not only run this way, but some of its tributary would have run this way and actually exit the continent on the west coast here. So there are many discoveries that have shown that there are mega lakes under the sand of the Sahara. So it is known that this region would have been water laden, so it would have more resembled this region, which is the Tanzania and Kenya region of the continent, which has like Serengeti. Let me find that. Okay, so yeah, so this is more what we don't see as the Sahara. This is what it would have been looking like. It would have swamps, lakes, rivers. It would have seasonal rains. It would have dry seasons that look like this. Dry season that look like this. You would have elephants migrating, wildebeest migrating, lions. All of those would have been in that region of the world. So what Poseidon would have seen in his ventures on the sea, so their expertise in seafaring or sea ventures would have brought them into the Mediterranean to do fishing, but their capabilities and advance technologies would have allowed them to venture into. So they would have been one of the only groups that would have actually exited the Mediterranean region and actually enter into the larger ocean. At that time, this ocean wouldn't have had a name because in Plato's story, it was his son who he named the Atlantic Ocean after. So this ocean that we now call the Atlantic Ocean, they would have been one of the first groups to venture into it. So in his travels, he would have been scouting locations to conquer or new territories to move into. So when they see West Africa looking like this, and perhaps even seeing waterfalls, new mountain ranges, perfect beaches, looking out this way, seeing the perfect sunset or sunrise, they would have made the Ricard structure their home. One additional thing that most persons, or why most persons don't believe that the Ricard structure is the location of Atlantis, is the story that Yates sunk into the water. But this is the significant feature that most persons are not realizing what it did. So this is a crack in the planet. It runs down the entire side of the planet, much like so yeah, this is a significant crack. I'm going to find what it looks like. So yeah, this is the crack on Mars. There's also an entire section of Mars that has a significant crack in the entire planet, going along the entire side. However, there is no water on Mars, but on Earth there's water here. So what this crack is doing, it's not only pushing the continents apart. So everyone knows about plate tectonics. This continent is being pushed this way, and this zone is a subduction zone where this continent is going over this section of the seafloor. We have a lot of volcanoes and fault lines here. What is also happening here is that this crack is resulting in this plate being pushed. So Africa, the entire Nubian plate is being pushed this way. However, there's no subduction zone, no major subduction zone here. As you can see, there's no subduction zone on this side. So what is happening is this entire continent is buckling right here. So the entire Horn of Africa here, there's a new Somalian plate developing, and this plate, the major Nubian plate, is being buckled, it's being tilted, it's being lifted, it's being warped. So the mid-Atlantic ridge is causing the African continent to actually warp. It's not a significantly violent process. There's not a lot of eruptions that it's causing. is doing it centimeter by centimeter for thousands of years, so millions of years. It's pushing the continent. So this is what that would have been. So this is the Great Valley Rift. So as you can see here, the Nubian plate, and there's a new plate here that's forming, that's called the Somalian plate, and then above that you have the Arabian plate. So what this means is that the desertification of this entire region is not just climate change or because the ice age changed. It's actually these things are being tilted and lifted. They're being warped, which is causing the change in the flows of the river. So for example, the Nile no longer flows this way, not only because the rain system has changed, but because the continent is tilting. So it would be like the river is attempting to flow uphill. So many of those significant changes are happening because of plate tectonics. Let me find some others. So this is how the plate system was looking. As you can see, the arrows are pointing to which direction the forces are moving, the tectonic forces. This is the mid-Atlantic ridge pushing against Africa. This is the Great Valley Rift that exists in East Africa. So there's an entire rift in the continent, very, very long. The entirety of the eastern section of the continent is being affected, as you can see here. So the entire thing is being affected. So what it has done is this, right? This used to be the original coastline of Africa, but now this entire section has been pushed up. So it has been pushed up just about less than 400 meters. It has been pushed up. So all of this used to be under the sea. So importantly, the record structure some 35,000 years ago would have been on the coastline of Africa, of West Africa. So in this scenario here, this would have been the coastline of Africa. All of this part would have been underwater. So when Poseidon ventured from Egypt and the Mesopotamia region and the Petra region of the world and is on his sea voyages and fishing and stuff, he would have ventured out this way. He would have maybe gone up here and all he would have seen is ice and stone. Maybe like, that's not attractive, and he came down this side and he saw amazing waterfalls, grass plain meadows, lots and lots of animals, and he may have ventured this way, but all he saw was maybe natural resources, but not a lot of people. So however, when he came this way into Africa, he would have seen regular Africans, or I guess they would have been called Africans at the time, but they would have been black persons. Another significant thing that points to this region being the region. So Poseidon had, when he in Plato's story, he found his wife at the location where he was gonna create Atlantis, the city. He had twins with his wife. All his kids were sets of twins, so 5 sets of twins. Significantly, black persons, people of African descent, are the highest rate, have the highest rate of twin birth on the planet, and specifically this region of the world. So all the tribes that are from this region of the world and all the countries, so the Nigeria, the Ghana, this region of the world has the most twin births. So it is significantly higher. It's let's say 2 twins per 1,000 births, while most of the rest of the world is like 2 twins per 100,000 births. So this region of it, so the kids being twin is not a result of Poseidon's genes, it's a result of his wife's genes. So as we were saying earlier, Poseidon genes are most likely not dominant genes, they are recessive genes, and his wife's genes would have been the more dominant genes. So that may have contributed to why they had so many twins. So that adds to why this region of the world would have been the region that, because this is where the Atlas mountain range is. So this is still called the Atlas mountain range. This is still called the Atlantic Ocean. The one significant tribe from this region is the Dogon tribe. So the Dogon tribe is in Mali, which is right here. So perhaps many of the tribesmen who lived in this region interacted with the group that made this city, or while the city was here. So we know that the city got destroyed, but we don't know how long it was here. So it could have been here for 1,000 years, 10,000 years. So they would have had time to work with the farmman, the tribesmen that live in this region, which is perhaps why the Dogon had so many significant scientific knowledge that were far advanced for their time, such as knowing what this sun was and have documented history of it, knowing specific stars, entire binary systems, which system is a star versus which system is a galaxy, and certain other scientific information about how the movement of the star, tracking stars, because a significant feature for persons or groups who traveled by sea would not have been a compass as the main tool. The main tool would have been through star navigation. So to circumnavigate the planet, which is this route that we now have, because this route also fits with what Plato said when the Atlanteans were battling Athena, which is in Greece. They came through the gates of Hercule, which would have been this location here, the entrance of the Mediterranean into the Atlantic Ocean. So the adventure would have taken them up the coast of Africa through this gate into Mediterranean. They would have fought with the Athenians here. They would have lost and they would have ventured back home. But in terms of circumnavigating the planet, as we're saying, you couldn't go north, you couldn't go south. So the way to circumnavigate is to use the stars. You can travel by day and night. You venture through here, through the Red Sea, and you don't go open ocean, you stick to the coastlines, and then you go to these parts and look at the vastness of the Pacific Ocean, but yet they found the one island that is possible to find, which is Easter Island. And they found it, and they made their way to this part of the planet. As we were saying, there would be no pathway through here as yet, because the industrialized world is the one who made the Panama Canal, so there was no canal here to travel through. So they could have only been to this section, so they could have gone to Mexico by the Pacific side. But if they wanted to go Mexico via the Atlantic side, it would have been the traditional, the same route that the slave trade took, would have been this route. So they would have came to the Caribbean. And what this also means is that, right, so if Atlantis is in Africa and there are tribes people here, which is the original tribe for Poseidon's wife and Poseidon's kids, these tribes people would have seen people of their race or their makings or their tribe as the leaders of this city, this well advanced city. So many of these persons would be empathetic to their causes, would have joined them, would have trained with them to join their fleets. So when they ventured across the different sections of the world, some of the persons would be West African, some of them would have features that more resemble Egyptian, some of them would have features that resemble Turkish, some of them would have features that resemble Mesopotamian persons. So it would be a mixed race, mixed genes, hybrid group of beings or of persons. But also what that highlights is that yes, there would have been people with African features. So even Poseidon's kids would have had significant African features, which may explain this. So these are the Olmec statues. So the Olmecs are referred to by the persons who live in Central America as the rubber people. They're called the rubber people or the jade people. So this is important because, as we were saying, there's only two ways to get to this part of the world in these times. So you could either come Atlantic route, or you could come from Asia and Easter Island side and come this way. Asia is obsessed with jade, so I'm guessing some of them would have come this way and they would have been looking for jade. This group would have come this way looking for rubber. So some persons say these Olmec persons look African, some say they look Asian. To me, they look significantly African. So I'm assuming it's the rubber people. So it's these groups, some of their trips. Let's say one of Poseidon's son, he had his fleet, he ventured here. They look some rubber. So they were the ones who made these figures, because they would have still had the experience and traditions of working stone. They would have had the technology on their ship. They would have had the persons with the knowledge to build all of these. So these are all over the place. They're buried under tons of dirt. So some of them have been uncovered and have been placed in museum. They are massive heads. three-dimensional shapes, just the head. They have helmets and other features. Very detailed. You can see the pupils, eyelids, nose, nostril, lips, the rim of the lips. Everything is pretty detailed. The earlobes have lots of intricacies to it. So whoever made the heads were very experienced at working stone, which is a significant trait of these persons. So now let's move on to the destruction of Atlantis. So I'm not thinking they would have had a city that looks as advanced as this. It most likely it would be similar to so this in our time is we building a significant structure that can be seen from space. Is massive, lots of features, lots of intricacies. I'm thinking that they were doing something similar. And they built this. So what you can see here is this is more of what Atlantis would have looked like. I have to give credit to Jean Lawrence. He did the rendering of this photo. So it's just the record structure, which is this. Yeah, this photo. So he just rendered this, checked out the depths and stuff. So what I believe happened here is this, right? So as we're saying, they had significant stoneworking techniques and technology. They would have surveyed the land. They would have done examination of the stone, check the flows of the river, the fertility of the seasonal structures and stuff. So what I'm thinking is this is an actual test site that they test the structure of the ground to build a smaller version of what this is. So they actually made a sample or test what they were going to make, and then they started on this massive project here, and then here's the opening into what would have been the sea right here. So they probably started drenching from their ship. So most of the drenching would have taken place with their ship, and then they used their rest of technology and techniques to get this part sized and structured. And importantly, I would hope that someone would eventually excavate or dig into the middle circle, because one of the significant things that Plato said was that the middle circle he brought forth hot and cold water. And that to me sounds like some sort of mechanism that could cause that. If there's not a hot spring under here, there would have to be something, some mechanism that cause hot and cold water. So unless that is also washed away, I'm thinking that there's probably something buried here that they could look for. Additionally, all of this is salt deposits, many of these white bluish tones, and here is like salt deposits. So that highlights that there was vast quantities of water passing through these regions, whether it was the sea flowing in, or whether it was a catastrophic flood that covered the entire city, or it was the many rivers and lakes that were carrying dissolved minerals in this general area. But you can see that there was significant water presence here because of the striation flow marks and the salt deposits. So in general, perhaps what happened was, let's say, I have to close some of these. So let's say the comet did hit, or it was a solar event that sent significant debris crashing down onto the planet. You would have had something that resembled this. Massive waves, massive, gigantic, planet-wide waves. So, unfortunately, this would have significantly hurt the civilizations that existed during this time. Because, as we were saying earlier, they lived in the mountains, but they migrated all over and lived along the coastlines. So all of these areas are significantly close to the coastline. So all of these sites that are being attributed to them, they no longer lived in caves. So if it was a solar burst event and significant radiation or high energy particles or debris fields were coming down, they were no longer in their bunkers. So their mountain dwellings would have been like bunkers. But now they are seafaring, sea voyaging beings. They all live in river systems. They all live in canal systems or along the coast. So any such event would significantly wipe out a large proportion of these groups, especially in the open ocean. In the case of the Mediterranean, there's some protection because these small channels wouldn't allow for proper wave propagation. So if you're in the Atlantic, the full force of the wave would come in this side. But if you're in the Mediterranean, this small gap causes wave propagation to fail. So the waves that could come through this channel would not be significantly high to damage the groups that live in here. However, they would still feel some impact, but the tsunami level waves that would impact this part. If one fell in the Atlantic, if something fell in the Atlantic, the wave that would come this way would be significant. Or if the impact affected this line, this mid-Atlantic ridge as well, that earthquake that happened would be very significant as well. So there would be massive waves traveling this way, wiping out the Caribbean, and waves traveling this way, wiping out this entire coastline of Africa. So that would have taken out the Atlantis, and have it looking like this. So it would have moved from a stable looking zone into this, just a debris field. So you'll be covered in mud, So perhaps that's what was described by Plato and the Egyptians, that the city that once stood as this magnificent location was now just a debris field. But in those moments, there is no UN, there is no international organization to pull together funds and to put in a rescue effort. The significant entity that would have been capable of doing a rescue effort would have been just wiped out. So only the persons who were, let's say, only the persons who were the ambassador or the priest or the merchant or whoever from Atlantis who were out on a mission in the Mediterranean or in Egypt, who would have been the ones that survived this deluge that killed most of the planet. So they would now have to rebuild or to carry on. There's nothing they could do. The entire city is gone. They would just have to try keeping up with some of the processes that they were doing. So perhaps that is why so many sites around the world have unfinished works. You see this, which is the Moai statue still left in the quarry. This is a bunch of quarries around the world where large stones or large structures are left in the quarry unfinished. Many Moai statues are left unfinished. This is an unfinished obelisk. It's like a lot of places around the world, work started and then just stopped. So a lot of the stones are not fully refined to the level that they should be. You have sites like this, which is basically an elaborate cave system, which is very similar to Jordan. So this perhaps may have been their works as well. So they were in India working, they were in Ethiopia working. So this is also building or structure built from the top down, cut into bedrock with rooms and everything, elaborate structures. This has rooms and everything, statues, statuettes, elephant figures. All of this would have taken advanced planning, advanced stonework, knowledge, and so on. So in summary, the progenitors to the Atlanteans would have been the persons who were a mix of African or a mix of Homo sapien and significant Neanderthal or Denisovans DNA. They would have came from this region, spread out on a conquest type mission, ventured into their home base, would have moved from this region and moved to here, which ended up may have been the cause of their death or the cause of them being wiped out, along with the fact that their genes are recessive. So the survivors may have been the first set of or the last set of pharaohs for Egypt, or the kings list would have been documenting some of them. Additionally, one major feature that may have been theirs is the feature of them having large skull structures. So this may have been the thing that caused the global head modification or skull deformation trend that or ritual that started among almost all groups across the planet. So it's popular in Iraq, Iran, Mesopotamia had it, even as far as into the Caribbean had it. All the Taino tribes and the Arawak tribes in the Caribbean had it. All of South America practiced it. So Egypt had it as well. So what may have happened is that, as we were saying earlier, persons who have significant Denisovan or Neanderthal DNA have recessive genes. So if they mate with each other, the kids would have the elongated skull or the long skull. But if they mate it with a normal Homo sapien, significantly high, that feature will go away. So what may have happened is that when most of them died off during that major event that destroyed Atlantis, the ones that, let's say, were left in Egypt or left in India, they would have been in charge. But when they had kids, so they would have been in charge, they would have been seen as prestigious, they would have seen as the persons in charge, the person with significant knowledge. So all of that would have been a great trait, which means that the elongated head is also seen as a great trait. When they have kids, the kids would lose that trait, and they perhaps were trying to preserve some of those features, or normal humans were trying to mimic them, and that's how that elongated skull myth started, or the skull deformation process started. So that's also another thing. So that's the end. Please remember to subscribe and share the video. The record structure is Atlantis. It's not a natural geographical feature, it's most likely a man-made feature. Petra was once the home location or home base of the progenitors of the Atlantis society. They are a mix of Homo sapien, Neanderthal, and Denisovan DNA persons. They are not aliens. This is the map of their locations. Everything will be attached, all the references will be attached in the description. So this is the end of the presentation. Hopefully we added to the conversation, added to the story. Please enjoy.